But there's immaturity and then there's stupidity, right? And in young adults, a lot of things can be chalked up to immaturity. But as we get older, these things are no longer immaturity, they're stupidity. They are no longer accidents, they are choices. Question number 3, and this is really important because if you've been following us since we announced the anthology, the wording for this has changed a little bit to clear up some misconceptions for the stories we were getting, right? And when we started out, we very clearly said that the anthology is new adult. That then led to us getting a bunch of young adult submissions. So we had to be very clear, like, hey, this is an adult anthology. However, your protagonist can be 17 and up. And not just for Magic and the Melanin, but in general, I think it's important to denote the difference between young adult, new adult, and adult. And I'm going to let Tatiana cover that because she is way more succinct at explaining things, particularly when it comes to this, than I am.
Well, you can follow up and like fill in the holes that I missed. So I first definitely want to acknowledge that new adult is the Wild Wild West. Because it's not acknowledged by traditional publishing, there's not any real hard parameters on it or like hard guidelines or boundaries on this is what new adult is. But in regards to this anthology or even future anthologies, this is how we are going to define it. And generally, new adult stories, they are written for about an audience of 18 to 25-year-olds. One of the reasons why there's a lot of mix-up is because there are definitely authors who write more YA stories, but make them sexy and put them in new adult so they can get away with it. And that is not what we're looking for. We're not looking for sexy YA stories. When we think of new adult, I'm thinking of themes, I'm thinking of character actions, character decisions, and also from a prose level. When we think about the themes for new adults, we are thinking about characters who are adults. They're just new at it. They might be coming into responsibilities, newly coming into jobs, and it might be a little bit difficult to kind of consider what that looks like in a fantasy setting. But as some examples, coming of age stories are very popular in YA. So what happens after the coming of age story? What happens after the princess has become the queen? How does she rule this kingdom? Think about dark academia. Like, what about dark academia stories set in college or grad school? Like, we're really looking at separating YA from new adult and adult because I feel like there are some distinctions and there are some things that we can kind of at least define a little bit. So I do look at prose, word choices. There is a difference between stories on a prose level written for YA, written for teenagers, and on a prose level written for adults. That does look different. So we do consider prose when thinking about what's YA and what's adult. We're looking at the character's actions. Now, not to say that, adults don't make immature actions and we're perfect all the time, but I would hope that ratio is a little bit better, more towards adult.
So I'm going to tag in here because if y'all have been on the channel, y'all know that I can be really ruthless when it comes to books and things. So I'm going to say this and I'm going to be honest with you guys, and hopefully this does not rub anyone the wrong way, right? But there's immaturity and then there's stupidity, right? And in young adults, a lot of things can be chalked up to immaturity. Going to a party you have no business at. That's immaturity. You don't have the experience for it yet. Falling in love with the wrong person. That's immaturity. Like, if this is your first or second relationship, you don't have the experience for that yet. But as we get older, these things are no longer immaturity. They're stupidity. They are no longer accidents. They are choices. And with adult fantasy or adult stories, you need a little bit more logic. You have to make these things make sense. So if there are bad decisions happening, if they're going to a party they don't need to be at, it needs to be beyond their control. And there needs to be some acknowledging of, I probably shouldn't do this. There should be some thought process behind it, even if the bad decision still happens. That's called character development and growth. And I feel like in adult stories, that has to hit a lot sooner, whereas in young adult, you have the entire book to hit that growth. In adult, I expect you to start learning from these mistakes immediately, right? I don't want to be here for 500 pages of stupidity, personally speaking. But like Tatiana said, on a prose level, I want my brain to be engaged when I'm reading your sentences. I want to fall into the world. I look at things differently from an adult perspective than I do from a young adult perspective. Mostly because I'm a lot more forgiving for young adult, simply because I am not the target audience, and there is a slightly different pacing, slightly different introduction of details, slightly different just overall feel to the story for young adult versus adult. You know, adult is a little bit, gotta dig a little deeper, as they say from Princess and the Frog, you know? I think the key thing to focus on here, like Tatiana said, new adult. It's still adult. They're brand spanking new at this. They're not in high school anymore. That safety net has started to pull back a little bit. You are now in the world and people are looking at you with expectation. It's no longer, oh, you're a kid, I've got you covered. If you mess up, someone's going to come in and swoop in and solve the problem. It's no, you are the adult in the room. You are responsible for yourself. Your actions do carry consequences that no one can just swoop in and save you from at this point. And thematically, that's a really important distinction. So if you have young adult and you just have teenagers and they're banging and you're like, oh, it's no adult. It is not. You just have YA and they're banging, especially if they're still in high school and their biggest problem is who they're going to take to prom. Yeah, that's young adult. Sorry. No, I'm not sorry. I rescind my apology, but you get what I'm saying. That being said, new adult, summarily, they're adults. They're just new at it. They're not very good at it yet, but they're still adulting. Moving on to specifically with Magic and the Melanin, let's talk about what the ideal submission would look like.